Hey leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Devoting Advisors. We also recorded this episode live from the return.com studio. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel as well, so make sure you're subscribed there at L3 Leadership. And as always, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's impacted your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, in today's episode, you are in for a treat. You're going to hear my conversation with Dr. Henry Cloud. This is his second time on the podcast. I interviewed him way back in episode number 155. And so if you enjoyed today's conversation, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to that as well. And if you're one of the few people on the planet who don't know who Dr. Cloud is, let me just tell you a little bit about him. He's an acclaimed leadership expert, psychologist, and best-selling author who draws on his extensive experience in clinical psychology and leadership development to impart practical and effective advice. And in our conversation, you're going to hear us talk all about his brand new book, which is called Trust, Knowing When to Give It, When to Withhold It, How to Earn It, and How to Fix It When It Gets Broken. We also talk about what he's seeing in regards to mental health and leadership. And at the end of our conversation, I ask him how to respond to people who don't respond well to you when you set boundaries. And I loved his answer to that. And so I think you're going to love this conversation. But before we dive into that, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Devoting Advisors. The financial advisors at Devoting Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Devoting Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at devotingadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Devoting Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny, and my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I also want to thank our new sponsor, return.com. And leader, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had an interest in investing in real estate? Well, now for as little as $500, you can become a commercial real estate investor. Just visit return.com to learn more. That's REITURN.com. Investing involves risk. Please consult the Return Offering Circular if you're interested in investing. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Dr. Henry Cloud. Well, Henry Cloud, it's great to have you back on the podcast. It's been, I think, 6 years since you were originally on, and I've gotten so much great feedback from that first interview. So thank you again for taking time. And you have a brand new book coming out called Trust, which we're going to dive into here in the interview. But before we dive into that, I'd be remiss not to talk to you about leadership and mental health. Obviously, we're just coming out of COVID, and at least from what I'm seeing, a lot of mental health issues going on with leadership. Yeah. And I'm just curious from your perspective, coming out of COVID, what are you seeing when it comes to mental health in the leadership space?
I wish that I could say that it was different than the general population, but it's kind of like that. If we look at people that meet diagnostic criteria for depression, anxiety, and addiction, for example, pre-COVID, it always hovers around 16 to 18% of Americans would meet criteria for being able to be diagnosed as depressed, addicted, or, some kind of anxiety disorder. Well, starting in about the summer of 2020, okay, you ready for this? That number went to over 40.
Wow.
40%. So we're not talking about, those people, there's some people that are, we're talking about pretty much if you're in a workplace, somebody in the cubicle next to you, and if not that one, 2 cubicles over, or a family member or somebody. And what surprised me was that, in a way it surprised me, but then when you start to look at it, it really is not surprising when you understand what happened in COVID. Is what surprised me was that, you hear the phrase, we're out of COVID. But what I started to find was COVID's not out of us.
Mm.
And I started to see that people were still struggling, even though we're, quote, out of it. And you start to look at when they are and ask the question, why? And the short way for me to explain this is, and I always say, if I were Dr. Evil and wanted to figure out a way to just decimate a human, I'd come up with COVID.
Wow.
Because what COVID did was it basically struck at all the foundational and essential elements that make humans thrive. And, we're going to obviously do the whole show on this, but just to take a second, what I mean by that is that the things that make us healthy, COVID wrecked, and we established patterns in that, call it a year or whatever, more maybe, depending on where you live. We established patterns during that time that are very not healthy. And then COVID ends, but patterns remain. Because patterns get to be neurological wiring that order behavior. And so, just to mention a few things, the foundation of health and thriving and mental health and leadership and everything else is the level and depth and quality of our attachments or our connections to people from whom we draw life. Well, what did COVID do? Instantly, boom, everybody's isolated. You no longer see your best friend at work. You don't go to your small group. You don't go to this guy, and the family's no longer getting together over here. You're not seeing your friends. And all of a sudden, and now everybody's working remotely. Well, the question became, how efficient can we be being remote? Well, that's not the number one question. The number one question is how healthy you can be, because that's going to drive, how productive you are and how clear the thinking is. But apart from that, the mental health. So people got these isolated, remote kind of patterns, less connected. And there were some things I liked about that and some things, but the problem is the patterns have remained. And now they're not as connected as they used to be. A lot of people now, some are. And then the second thing is, it's sort of like you build a house. After the foundation of connectedness, you've got to frame. You got to frame the house. Well, our lives get framed by the structure of our lives and the routines of our lives. You have circadian rhythms that your mental health is built on structures of days and nights. Those turn into weeks. The weeks turn into months. Months turns into a season. Season turns into a year. And we have rhythms and structure. You take anxious kids who don't have any structure, and then the principal comes through, okay, everybody in their desk, we're going to have nap time, and this, all of a sudden they calm down. That's why a lot of kids that, they're diagnosed with ADD or whatever, some of them, there's really nothing neurological going on. The kids have no structure in their home. They're all over the place.
Wow.
And so I remember when I came down to my computer that first week of lockdown, logged in one morning, and I looked at my calendar and I went, oh my gosh, our server crashed. I called my assistant. I said, what happened? She goes, no, it didn't crash. You're seeing white space because everything's canceling.
Wow.
Now think about that. Everybody was looking at white space and they were lost and swimming in, what do I do with my day? And I used to go to this meeting and I had this and this. And so all of that was gone. And they're find themselves in a very unstructured lives from the moment their eyes open till they go to bed. And they got into all sorts of pattern where they lost their sense of order and routine and all that. The CEOs I work with, I would have them, have a morning call every morning in the early days with their team and have specific elements in that call, and then drive that practice down throughout the organization and some other routines to get them back working again. So we do in a psych hospital. We have a schedule, right? And so you got that, then you got the loss of control that people experience because you had no control anymore. You said, let's go to lunch. Oh, I can't do that. Oh, well, why don't we have an event? No, we can't do that. But and you lost control, and that adds to mental health problems. And then they weren't processing the pain and the fear. So there was a number of things that happened, but then people got into patterns of that. And it's the patterns that they need to reboot. And that's the short version of why it remains.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. In the fall of 2020, while COVID was happening, and again, this may have been unrelated. Again, to give you brief context, I had lost my sister to a drug overdose in December of 2019, and basically rescued my dad, put together a message for the funeral, raised a ton of my money for my nephews, and went back to work and basically just medicated the pain through performance. 9 months later, I don't know how else to describe it other than I feel like I had a mental breakdown. There was a period where I had to take a week off of work. I didn't know if I'd be able to ever return. Scariest, darkest season of my life, lasted several months. And since I've come out of that, I started a lot of help, therapy, et cetera. And I feel like God taught me a lot through that process. But as I'm sharing that with leaders now, I get one of two responses, either leaders saying, I feel like I'm in the middle of that now, or I feel like I'm on the verge of having that happen to me. And I'm just curious, in your experience working with leaders, when someone comes to that point and they're in the middle of a mental breakdown or whatever you would call it, what would your advice and encouragement be to them in that season? Because I feel like so many leaders are there right now.
Well, the slam dunk, you have to immediate advice is reach out to someone who knows what they're doing. Okay. Right now, you're a closed system. And anything in a closed system, second law of thermodynamics tells us, deteriorates. Right? So what you've got to do, your head is a closed system. You have got to open up the system to the two things that make things get to a higher order, and that is outside sources of energy. Because the energy inside of you is depleting, you're getting more depressed, you're getting hopeless, you're getting fearful. The energy that's there is toxic. It's anxiety and being hyped and stress and all that kind of stuff. So you need some support, but not just any support. The second thing that's got to come in to make something better is intelligence. So you can put gas into a car and get support, but if you don't have a carburetor with a design to it to use that energy to send it in the right place to drive the wheels, it ain't going to work. So I want you, if you're a position of leadership, people depend on you and you're functioning. And so if you won't do this for yourself, at least do it for them. Find somebody that knows what they're doing, a very, very good psychologist, psychiatrist, mentor, somebody and hopefully they understand the business and leadership as well. If you can't find it all in one person, you need a few. Don't go through this by yourself. There are people that know what to do. They really do know how to help you. And it will work with the right people. That's what I would say, first of all.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I know, I needed that advice, and thankfully I took similar, but thank you for...
Just another thing I was going to say, now there's a bunch of other stuff I would say as well, but the second one I want you to hear from Doug is what I was going to say to you is if you're going through that, don't let that somehow criticize you as you're not a good leader, you'll never be able to do this, you're not good enough, you're not strong enough. There's no shame at all look, you can have a perfectly good house and building. I just happened to a friend of mine in Utah, Park City, is an incredible house, but they got more snowfall than the house was designed to hold. And the thing, they had a section of it that caved in. because there's 86,000 feet of snow sitting on top of it. Well, your life right now, if you're in that place, you've incurred more snow on your head than a normal human was designed to withstand, and it's cracking. So there's no shame in that. So don't feel bad about it. Just like Doug is here telling us about when he went through that. I've written about when I went through that. So there's no shame in this.
Yeah, that's so good. And just like you said, how you've written, how you've gone through it, what was so encouraging to me is when you do open up and do start looking, so many leaders that I admire had gone through something similar. I actually had a mentor tell me, like, Doug, I can't name very many leaders that I know personally who haven't gone through something similar. And just knowing that I wasn't alone, and that other leaders have gone through that and made it to the other side. Because my biggest fear, I was never suicidal, but it was always, am I ever going to get through this? Am I ever going to come back to a sense of normalcy in my life? And really knowing that leaders like yourself had gone through it gave me hope. And it was so helpful. So thanks for sharing that you've gone through it as well.
Hey, who doesn't know a house that you've gone to visit somebody and you look at it and go, this place is incredible. And they go, well, we just remodeled it 4 years ago. That wing didn't be here. It didn't start out incredible. And if you were there in the middle of the remodel, it looked like a mess. So, hopefully everybody's going through some remodels and upgrades, and you never see that without a lot of sawdust. So, you're onto a good path.
Well, thank you. I want to dive into your new book. Again, if you've never read any of Dr. Cloud's books, I encourage you to buy them all. I've been deeply impacted by so many. Two of my favorites are Necessary Endings and Changes That Heal. Both made a really profound impact on my life at different seasons. But you have a new one coming out called Trust. And I'll just leave this really open-ended to start. Why did you write this book, and what do you want leaders and or people to get out of it?
It's an interesting question. I get sometimes like, how did you become an author? Or I go, I'm really not. I mean, that's not what I do. I'm a practitioner. I spend over 100 days a year in war rooms with CEOs and their teams, and one-on-one, and, offsites, and in pretty gnarly problems and realities they're having to negotiate, and boards and all that stuff. That's what I do. But in that, I always say, I didn't write the book. The work wrote the book. It just emerges. There's issues that begin to talk to me. I'll see something over and over and over, or find myself in the same conversation or the same scenario frequently enough, say, you know what, this is a big problem. People don't have easy handles to negotiate. And that's when I'll start to say, maybe it'd be helpful to have a tool, to guide people through that. And that's generally how I've written all my books.
Yeah. So this whole subject of trust, what emerged in your work where you recognized it? Was it people not trusting each other, so they weren't able to have good relationships? Was it leadership? Yeah. Tell me about the root cause of the work that emerged.
Well, if you're thinking, let's just talk about just leadership. All right.
Yeah.
Trust fuels investment. If somebody trusts you, they're going to invest. And they're not going to invest if they don't trust. Or they're only going to invest to the degree that they trust. Right? So when we're talking about investment, what does that mean? Well, if you're a leader, you cannot grow without investment. Maybe it's financial. Maybe you need donors. Maybe you need VC money. Maybe you need private equity money. Maybe it could, but you're going to need money from somewhere. Maybe you need from a bank, or you're going to self-fund it. But if you're going to self-fund it, would you go self-fund yourself to start an NBA team? Probably not. Why? You don't trust yourself to be able to do that. But you've checked some boxes on thinking that you can self-fund something because you do feel really good about your ability to deliver, right? But trust fuels investment. It may not be financial. It may be in your team. Have you ever had a team where you got one person's 1 foot in and 1 foot out? They're not fully invested in the mission, or they're not fully invested in your vision. You ever had a marriage where somebody's got 1 foot in and 1 foot out? They're not fully. See, it fuels investment, and we need investment, not only of money, we need people's time, we need their energy. The more they trust, the more they're all in. Okay. So it's so important because it makes everything work. Now, here's the bigger problem for leaders. Not only does it make it work, it is your only possibility to scale anything to any size.
Wow.
Period. All right? For example, I'm sitting on a plane and I'm working on the trust material. A guy next to me says, "What are you working on?" I said, "Well, I'm researching trust." He goes, "Well, I don't trust anybody. I learned a long time ago. You can't trust people. I only trust myself." And I go, "What? You know what? I'm a psychologist and you're crazy." "Well, what do you mean I'm crazy?" I said, "Dude, look out the window. You're at 43,000 feet. Did you get yourself here? No. You're trusting a couple of people up there in the cockpit. You don't even know their names. And there's a guy that put fuel on the plane. How do you know it's not filled up with chocolate milk and we're about to go?" You can't function without trusting. If you can't trust, you're going to live in a cubicle in a forest in a cave somewhere. Now let's go to running a business. And so then I said, but I would bet you've been hurt in some ways personally. I'd love to hear that story. And we hear the story, and he's limited his ability to trust, and he's really wrecked a lot of his path because of his inability to trust. How in the world? Let's say you start a business, or you start a church, or whatever it is you're doing. You've got a vision, okay? And unless you're going to order the paper clips, you're going to have to let go and turn stuff over to people. Now, everybody's afraid to do that to some point because you've been burned. And some people, to the extent they can't do it, and they never really scale. I mean, if you're going to run a global entity, I have CEO clients that run global companies. And you got to send somebody to run the Pacific Rim. Or you can say, I want you to go build a business in Europe. If you've got to go check up on every move, decision, and thing that they're doing, you will never get very big. So why is it important there? Well, it's important there. But let's go to the other side. A brand has got to be trusted. I mean, right now, there's a company, just something stupid and simple as everybody learned this in COVID, right? My sweatpants that I live in now. I saw an ad pop up yesterday. I said, I'll buy anything they have, because
wow,
this is the way life works. And so businesses that focus on their brand being trusted, or their stakeholders trusting them, it is everything. So what happens is people hit the go button, but they hit the go button sometimes because they have a certain feeling about somebody, or they like this or like that, but they didn't check all the boxes. So what became important to me is making a simple model where people could understand that I might feel good, but should I take the next step, and how big a step should I take, and giving them some things to check off. And we can be wrecked in two directions. We can trust sooner, or when we shouldn't. The subtitle of the book says, when do you get, trust? When do you give it? But when do you withhold it? And how do you earn it? And how do you fix it when it gets broken? Because that's kind of those are the areas we get burned in. We either trust too much or too soon when we shouldn't, or we don't trust when we should. I mean, how many times have people said, oh my gosh, I missed the greatest opportunity because I was a little too skeptical, a little too critical. Should have bought Apple stock. I should have hired that person. Now look what I had a chance to hire them, and now look what we screw up.
Yeah, on the trust is given side, I'm really, really curious. I've heard in leadership that, you give trust until it's broken. But what I'm hearing you say is that can be true, but that can also burn you. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that from a leadership perspective? And what are some of those boxes we should check before we give trust?
Well, I've heard that too. And I mean, you can take any sentence and pick it apart, right? It's sort of like train up a child in the way they should go. And then, they won't depart from it. Well, that's it's true, but then, we can pick it apart. So I think what that sentence means is if people are going to perform, you've got to empower them and trust them with what you've empowered them with, right? But I think that sentence comes in a timeline. All right?
Wow.
That's not day one when I meet you. Somehow we've gotten to the point to where I'm going to trust you until it's been broken. But I'm not going to take that step until, as one of my favorite verses says, he who's been faithful in little will be given more. And he who's not, it'll be taken away. So we've got to have some sort of a vetting process, or you'd go down to the bus station and, build out your executive team with people you've never met. So that can't be hi, I just met you and go run my company. I'm going to trust you till you break it. No. So it's got to be, that sentence has got to be contextualized, I think. So it's true, but you got to contextualize it. When you trust people, if you, and here's the way to say it, I think, you've got to let them go to do what you've empowered them to do. And trust means, by definition, you are making yourself vulnerable. If they screw it up, it will hurt you. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that you go bury your head in the sand. I trust, if I'm a pilot, I trust the airplane. I'm going to trust the autopilot. I'm not going to be grabbing the controls, right? And doing, I drive a Tesla, and I found out, you screw with the autopilot thing too hard and you're going to be going all over the road. You got to trust this thing. It's the most, it's one of the most, it's a scary deal the first time when you're going down, going 70 miles an hour down a freeway and you don't have your hands on any controls. It's weird. It's like having your teenager when they get their learner's permit. Well, let's just use that example. I remember when Olivia, our oldest daughter, got her learner's permit, and I get in the car for the first time, and I'm sitting on the right seat. And I go, wait a minute. I wiped your butt. What are you doing driving the car? How did you get to be this big? And you can't. And so the tendency is you want to take over what you've given them control of. And to the point of that sentence, you can't do that. You've got to let them drive the car. You have to. But I didn't start her in, here's the keys. I'm going to sit over here. You drive. The year before, I was taking her to big parking lots on Sunday afternoon when the stores closed, and kind of playing around. And then she went to driver's ed and this, that, and the other. So, yeah, now I'm going to let you drive the car. But we're going to do something to get to that point. And that's kind of what the book is about. How do you determine when you can let go and actually make yourself vulnerable to somebody and when you shouldn't?
That's so good. I want to spend a little bit of time. You mentioned talking about how to repair trust once it's been broken. And I would just love to ask you, like, how many times do you work with organizations where that is the key core issue of so many other issues that are wrong with the organization? I'd just be interested from a leadership viewpoint. But then can you just talk about what can we do as individuals
let me ask it this way.
Yeah.
Name an organization's issues that doesn't have trust as one of the elements.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. Everything's built on trust, I guess.
Well, that's why I said one of the elements. It's sort of like, the only thing that matters is trust. Well, come on. You need air, food, and water. You can't ever say there's one thing, what's the one thing? I hate that question but there are a few things. There's food groups, right? Mm. So there are a few things. So I just don't know any organization's issues where trust is not a piece of it. So name one, name anything, and we'll try to illustrate.
Yeah, just staffing issues. Yeah.
Okay, you said staffing?
Yeah, you have an employee who's not performing.
Okay, so you got an employee who's not performing. Well, let's roll the clock back. How in the world did we hire them? Not that we don't make everybody gets burned. I'm not saying nobody, if you go through even the Bible, story after story, God gets burned, right? Hmm. But if you got a lot of non-performers, that may tell you that you have a systemic DNA of an operating system that does not check the right boxes before you entrust a chair to someone. Okay? So a non-performer is not just a non-performer. If you've got an infection, and you go to the doctor, the symptom is the non-performance. But they also want to find out what's causing the symptom. Is it a bacteria or a virus? So now I've got to ask the question, who's managing this person? Who's holding them accountable? Who's not? What are our performance standards? All of this. But then I would go further back as a doctor and say, how did this bug take root? Because we've got an immune system problem. Their immune system is down. It's not fighting this off. This person, this bug, this virus should never have gotten that position. So now maybe we've got, just follow this. Now we look at, well, whose house does this live in? And you go all the way up and you see at the C-suite, this is somebody who's conflict avoidant. And they see non-performance problems all the time, but they're afraid to hold people accountable. So any issue, some part in there, we're going to ask, who do we trust and why? Should we have and shouldn't we? And when it breaks down, how do they address it? And on and on and on. I was called in not too long ago to a C-suite conference call where they're having their executive team meeting and they want to talk about a certain issue, and I log in. And so they said, give us a few minutes. We're wrapping up something here. And they're talking, and I can hear they're talking about they gotta let somebody go. The person they're letting go is a big influencer in the organization and, been there a long time and kind of a big deal. And I said, so who are y'all getting rid of? And they said, so-and-so. And I said, so are they part of the executive team? And they go, no, they're, they do. So I said, do they report to somebody on the executive team? They go, no, they report to, it's kind of like 2 or 3 levels down. And I said, I got a question. How did somebody 3 or 4 levels down's performance, A, go on long enough to where it was an issue, but B, how does that take up executive team time?
Wow.
If you look at the immune system of a body, the executive team is like your prefrontal cortex. It's where your attention goes. So the only reason your attention is ever going to focus on that you feel nauseated is because the levels below your executive team awareness, the levels have broken down. See, when that bug first entered your mouth, 1 billion of them a day or more get taken care of by your saliva. You never even know about it. People get fired all the time because the system is trained to deal with it way down below. It only makes it to the top if there's a breakdown. So trust is a big deal.
Yeah. And just in our individual relationships or even at work, how can we repair broken trust? Is it repairable? Are there situations where it's not? Any advice there from the book?
Well, if it weren't repairable, then who would make it to, age 6? One mistake and you're done. One failure and it's over. No, if it weren't repairable, there'd be no such thing as growth and change and all of that. Now, there are misdemeanors and there are felonies also. So this isn't a toggle switch where all things are equal and all kinds of repair go down the same process and take the same amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, it's absolutely repairable. I could take you to so many incredible entities that are run by people who had massive failures, in a previous iteration of themselves. We all probably know marriages that are so strong and robust and fruitful. And I just read a story, and I have friends like this who will tell you they have the most awesome marriage actually as a result of the affair.
Wow.
That the process they went through, not that I'm suggesting people have affairs, but the process that they went through, because it showed them some things that they had to grow in. And now, because they've grown and their trust has been repaired, they have incredible strong marriages. And in the book, I write about this process a lot but it doesn't happen every time. And it certainly doesn't happen without the right ingredients being in the process. And so the mistake people make is somebody says, I'm sorry, and that sorry is enough to trust again. Sorry is enough to forgive. Forgiveness is free. Okay? You don't even have to repent to be forgiven. You got to repent to be reconciled, but forgiveness can happen with just one party. The person, the wounded party, forgiveness is something. I mean, if not, if you need somebody to come tell you sorry, how are you going to forgive a dead parent, for example? You got to go call a medium. Daddy, can you come back? I have to tell you. Forgiveness is free and it's something one person does. Now, reconciliation takes 2. Okay, and somebody's going to come to the party. But you can be reconciled to somebody and still not trust them. Why in the world would you on day 1? It's like a New Year's resolution. If somebody's been a drunk and they say on December 31st, well, tomorrow I'm going to quit. I'm not trusting that. I'm going to encourage it. And I would say, great, then do what? Let's get you in a path that can make that sustainable and trustworthy. And it may be, as we see in 8 million gazillion cases, that one day that person's going to be leading a recovery group and bringing other addicts to sobriety, but not on January the 4th. So we better have a process in place that has very objective anchors that we can check to know if we're going to trust somebody. And
do you have any advice for?
It's a if and when and how much.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, people, a lot of times they'll say, okay, I've forgiven them. They see the error of their ways. They're really committed. They're brokenhearted. And they put them right back in charge of something. Well, that's what I mean by if and how much and when. So maybe don't put them back in charge of something. Are they willing to clean the toilets for 6 months? What are we gonna trust them with, and what's their response to the kind of program of restoration or whatever you want to call it? And you see this a lot of times. You see it in nonprofits. You'll see somebody wreck something and take half the congregation and run next door and start something new. Well, that's January 1st. Why is that going to be any different, right? So there are a lot of people that have had failures that come back, but there's got to be a objective process by which that happens. So you don't trust them the next day.
I'm sure this varies based on whatever the breach of trust was. But do you have have you seen a general period of time for restoration when leaders have broken trust, whether that's 6 months to a year of them actually showing that they've changed and earning trust? Is there a period, or is it just case by case?
When do you take a cake out of the oven?
When it's done?
When it's done. So you could say, for example, okay, this particular cake, by the way, have you ever thumbed through a cookbook? They all don't say 1 hour. Every cake is different. And here's the problem. They might say an hour at 350, but just in the houses we've lived in, every oven ain't the same. Even the expensive ones. So what's going on in that year? How hot is it? This is why I said earlier, you got to get some people at the table and know what they're doing, because you take a cake out of the oven when the cake's done, not because it ought to take an hour.
Wow.
But I guarantee you one thing, at this juncture, having seen what I've seen over however many decades, I'd rather leave them in there a little too long than take them out too quick.
Wow. That's really, really good.
I'd rather everything. I'm kind of food poisoning phobic because I had a really bad experience. Ended up at the trauma center one time, and my wife laughs at me because if she lets me cook the chicken, it's just going to be a little too dry. But I don't have any false positives. I don't trust it until it's charred.
That's so funny.
Because it just depends on what's at risk, really. So if it's food poisoning, it's one thing. If it's I don't know, if it's a piece of toast, who cares? It's a little not done.
Well, thank you for writing this book. We'll include links to everything in the show notes. If you're listening now, the book is available and you can get it out on Amazon, pretty much anywhere books are sold. I want to ask one random question around boundaries, just because I've been asked this several times. I just want to hear your response. Obviously, you read a New York Times bestseller called Boundaries. Again, leaders, if you're listening and have not been involved with any of the boundaries work, really encourage you to dive into that.
And for leaders specifically, there's a second book called Boundaries for Leaders, which actually talks about the structures that leaders have to have in place, and you're the steward of the boundaries in your organization. But it gets to really important stuff that drives both the relationships as well as the results. And that's the boundaries applied to leadership.
Yeah, when this specific question is probably more individualized than just working in an organization, but I'll have people start to set boundaries in their life, and whether it's with loved ones or friends, without a doubt, especially if they're people of faith, they'll say the same thing, that they'll start setting boundaries with their family members for the first time in their life. And their family members will say, well, I thought you loved God, and I thought God is supposed to love everybody, and you're supposed to be a loving person. And a lot of times they don't know how to respond to that, and they don't know what to say. So I'm just curious, when you hear that response, or people have had that response that, loving Christians aren't supposed to set boundaries, I guess is what they're trying to say. What would your response be to that?
What's the boundary we're talking about?
Oh, it could be anything of just I guess in the specific.
Hold on, because we say it could be anything. Are you talking about somebody sleeping with their mother-in-law?
Okay.
Or are you talking about somebody not helping somebody with dinner? Both
yeah, it's probably.
By the way, now I'm saying this, you laugh.
Okay.
Both of those are in the Bible. Paul set a boundary with an entire church at Corinth about confronting somebody sleeping with their mother-in-law.
Wow.
Okay. Jesus set a boundary with Martha, who was railing at her sister for not helping her with dinner. Matthew 18 says, if somebody hurts you, sins against you, go to them in private and set a boundary. And if that doesn't work, get 2 people or 3 people and go together. So when you say, I set a boundary, well, what kind of boundary? And I want to know what kind of boundary, because it may be that person is being selfish and self-centered, and they're getting revenge in their so-called boundaries. And I've seen that happen. So we always have to say, what are we talking about? There is no such thing. If somebody says, well, I thought you were a Christian, thought you loved God, say, I do. So what is that? Are you saying that if I love God, then I will let you abuse me?
Wow.
Really? Tell me more about that. If I love God, I will go spend every holiday with you because you want me to, and I don't get to decide any of my own time. Is that what loving God means? That I'm going to do everything that one person that I love wants from me? I've got a lot of people that I love that are stakeholders in my life, and I'm going to spend time with. Are you saying you want all of that? Is that what it means to love God? I mean, this is ludicrous manipulation. It's just.
Yeah. Well, I think you just gave a lot of, that's exactly the answer I wanted to hear. You
well, and by the way, that's not going to help. It's not, because somebody's trying to control you. So what is going to help is you're dying to the wish for them to like your boundary, because you're talking about, in 99% of the cases, you're talking about a very controlling, person that everything revolves around them. And if you're saying no to them, that somehow, you're sinning. Okay. So that kind of person does not love feedback or doesn't love human freedom. They want to control you probably. So here's what does work. Giving up the wish for them to like it.
Wow.
And then doing two things. Set the limit and empathize with the fact that they don't like it. So, yeah, it sounds like, I understand it's really frustrating to you or maybe hurtful to you when I've said no and I'm not going to do that. But I'm still going to say no. And I'm sorry that's hard for you. And I love you. And if you want to do something else, great, but I got to say no to that.
Wow. Well, as always, thank you for your time today. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the book. I'm really looking forward to diving in, and just thank you for all you do for leaders and people everywhere.
Well, it's been good to be with you, and keep up the good work.
Well, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Dr. Cloud. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/363. And as always, leader, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups are groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. For me personally, mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 8 years. And if you're interested in learning more about launching or joining your own group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds or email me at dougsmith@l3leadership.org. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote Gerald Brooks today, who said this. He said, "Most people wouldn't grow without problems. In fact, they grow to the size of their problems rather than their potential." So good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Know that my wife Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and we say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll see you next episode.